Hello everyone, my name is Tony Anderson, and this video is about social penetration theory by Altman and Taylor. So you might be wondering, why did she have onions as the image on the first slide? Well, that is yet to come. So here's some food for thought. Do you think that instant intimacy exists? You might think of it as love at first sight, but think of it with respect to friendships too. Altman and Taylor's theory has to do with closeness through self-disclosure, and the author of your textbook defines self-disclosure as voluntarily sharing personal history, preferences, attitudes, feelings, values, and secrets with another person. Social penetration theory proposes that the process of developing deeper intimacy with another person occurs through mutual self-disclosure. In other words, you're showing your vulnerability or your bare belly, as you might think of your pets, for example, dogs, cats, any other animals actually too. When they are expressing a bit of trust toward you, you might see them baring their belly because they trust that you're not going to hurt them. Social penetration theory proposes that our personalities are like a multi-layered onion. So here I'm going to use a clip from the movie Shrek to introduce and make relatable this concept. So for this, you're going to need to pause the YouTube video, and there is a link in the description to another couple of YouTube videos, and just click the open the link for the first one, and that will be the Shrek clip. So if we think of our personality structure like a multi-layered onion, you might have onion-like layers of beliefs and feelings about yourself, about others, and about the world. The outer layer might be those beliefs and feelings that are held in common with other people, and beneath the surface are more semi-private attitudes that you reveal only to some people. And then the inner core of that onion would be made up of values, unresolved conflicts, deeply felt emotions, and your self-concept. So one of the best ways to understand social penetration theory is to continue with the onion analogy for our personality, and consider that you have a wedge that's literally, it sounds kind of violent, I recognize, but it's cutting into the onion, okay? And you can see that a little bit in this illustration here, which came straight from our book. So the degree of self-disclosure in a specific area of one's life can be represented by that wedge, right? It determines the degree of intimacy that you're sharing with another person. We call that the depth of penetration. So continuing along with that same idea, now you can see the illustration a little bit better. Once that wedge has penetrated deeply, it can actually return to that same depth with little resistance. This is why once you have self-disclosed to someone, let's say something deeply personal, it's easier to do it again. But also, consider that the wedge has a guard on it, or that you rather have a guard, right? That you limit the closeness that people can get to you. So you might never let anyone get to that deepest level. And you might not even yourself know what's at that deepest core. So in addition to depth, you also have breadth. And this is the range of areas in your life in which disclosure takes place. So all of the different, you see here in the image too, there might be, let's say, your worldview, what you're studying, your preferences for clothes, food, music. All of these things are considered the breadth of the various things that you might self-disclose or not with another person. So you might be wondering, can you have a relationship with breadth without depth of self-disclosure? The answer is yes, but that's going to be a more casual relationship. In order to have true intimacy with another person, you're going to have multiple wedges inserted deeply into most every area that you could self-disclose. So Altman and Taylor, the authors of this theory, made some observations about the depth and breadth of self-disclosure. The first one is that peripheral items, those on the outer edge of the onion, if you think of it like the onion model, are exchanged more frequently and sooner than the more private information that's deeper within that model of the onion. The second observation is that self-disclosure is reciprocal, especially in the early stages of relationship development. So to go a little further into that last observation I just mentioned, we should talk about the law of reciprocity, which is a paced and orderly process in which openness in one person leads to openness in the other. And I have a great clip that illustrates the law of reciprocity on the classic television show Cheers. Now for this, once again, you'll have to pause the video in YouTube and go down to where I've got the clips and click on the clip for Cheers. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that clip. And while this clip is a really exaggerated case of reciprocity, there are some things that we can think about with respect to this. So first one is, how and what kinds of personal information do you share yourself with someone that you have just met? Obviously, these two characters already know each other, so that's not really applicable in this case. But think about this. Okay, how and what kinds of personal information do you share with someone on a first date? And how and what kinds of personal information do you share with someone you've known for a year or more, which would be more applicable to this scene in Cheers, where they've known each other for years and years and years. So the reciprocity was happening quite readily and quite deeply. So to continue with Altman and Taylor's 4 observations about the depth and breadth of self-disclosure, the third observation they made is that penetration or self-disclosure is rapid at the start of a relationship, but slows quickly as the tightly wrapped inner layers are reached. So therefore it gets a little harder for the self-disclosure to happen when you get to those more private things at your core. And then the fourth observation they made is that deep penetration, so when you're the friendship is kind of ending, the relationship is ending, it is a gradual process of layer by layer withdrawal. That sounds sad, but if you think about relationships you've had that have ended, things do you gradually pull away from each other, right? Typically, it is not always this immediate, oh, they're gone. Maybe it is. I guess it depends on the kind of relationships that you've had, or maybe the kind you're thinking about, right? Because romantic relationships versus friendships, I think friendships do have that sort of deep penetration gradually. A romantic breakup can frequently be rather abrupt unless it's, say, a marriage, something that you've been in the relationship for a long time. So here I've got something rather, I don't know, frivolous maybe, but thought-provoking. So what if we changed the model that we're using to describe Altman and Taylor's social penetration theory, and use some other fruit or vegetable to explain how self-disclosure can contribute to relational development? Can you think of any that would work? So I can think of some, and they're all going to have different analogies, obviously, that go along with them. But you could use an avocado. Think of the how hard the core is of an avocado. You could use corn, like you see here in this picture, and that one could be quite interesting. The cob is particularly hard as well. But what about if you use something like a potato that's the same all the way through, or a mushroom? Or almost any melon that's got a harder, the surface is harder to penetrate than the inside. So there, and then the one that's the most challenging, I think, to try to come up with some equivalent analogies is the pomegranate. How would that work? So, so I also have the coconut here, right? So the coconut, along with, I think, what I mentioned about the melon, you might have to break through some very impenetrable barriers at first, right, to get to the meat. And you also have to contend with the messiness of the juice. So there's something to think of there. I bet you never thought of theories as food. Okay, so in the case of the mushroom too, there's a different kind of a dynamic that could be in play there. Some of the disclosure there might even be toxic. So, you know, if we think about these things, it can think about things in this way. It actually can help us to conceptualize these very abstract theories, right? Which is why I used the analogy that I did for social penetration theory, and your book does too. I mean, your book suggests the onion, right? So thank you for watching this fabulous food-filled video. And these are the references that I use. There is our textbook, and the two films or TV shows, the media that I used, are also listed here. So thanks again for taking the time to watch this, and I also hope that it provided you with an example of the kind of video you could create for us for your term project. The length of this, I haven't timed it to see how long it is yet. It might be a little bit longer than you might need, but also if you want to take a look at what is in the actual chapter that I was referring to here, I didn't cover everything in the chapter. That would have made the video would have been entirely too long for your needs for your term project. So keep that in mind when you are working on your term projects. So thanks again, and I will be in touch again very soon.